Good evening, morning, afternoon, night, whenever you find it most convenient to take a soda, mix some half and half and a bit of lime to make a dirty soda, and join us at the Bonfire. I, as always, am Alan the Pole with the goal, joined by my lovely co-hosts, Tim.
You're missing booze in that drink, and I feel like after the week of the fire I've had, most people will be mixing booze in that.
Yeah, but I mean, since it's against, okay, it's because it's a drink that the Mormons have created because of the fact they can't really drink. If you ever heard of a dirty soda.
So this is kind of like beside the point a little bit, but in the press box, they frequently have like the press meal is like themed to whoever the visiting team is. So like when it was Houston, it was like brisket barbecue, stuff like that. And they didn't do that last night because as far as I can tell, there really isn't any like Salt Lake City food. I joke to people they should have just like put a bunch of like white bread, like Wonder Bread loaves up and just been like, help yourself. And like, that would have been it.
Yeah. Or they could have had like a soda bar because soda shops are popular apparently.
They already have that. There's fountain drinks up there. That's the one perk.
Bro, you need to get me up there. I need to get some of that fountain drinks. Also, there's another co-host that we're totally not going to forget about, and it's one that hasn't been on for a hot minute because he does hot takes, and it's Matt.
Hi, everyone. I was genuinely really worried Alan and Tim had forgotten about me, but then I saw like a little smirk on Alan's face, and I knew that I just had to be patient, but I'm back. It's good to be here. Really excited to chat the fire, even though it's not the best time to be talking shop. One quick question, though, Alan. In your intro, you said put half and half in soda. Is that a thing?
That is an actual thing. It's called a dirty soda where you put either half and half or like coffee creamer with soda, and then you can put like lime or like other kind of garnishes in there, and it's called a dirty soda. And it's apparently it's a thing. Apparently,
I have feelings.
in the Mormon community. Yeah,
isn't that sort of like there's like Italian sodas where you use like heavy cream, like syrup and like sparkling water, like club soda. So this sounds similar, but like you don't actually use the real cream.
Yep, I'm just telling you what I've tried, and they actually did make like Coffee Mate, one of the companies that makes coffee creamers, has an actual like dirty soda thing that you have to mix with Dr. Pepper. And I've tried it, and it's all I can really describe it as is interesting.
Interesting. The more you know, huh?
For a hot minute, Coke tried making this like Coke that had coffee in it.
That'd be great.
You guys were like 5.
I remember that. Yeah.
I would love that.
It honestly wasn't terrible. It just wasn't the best version of it. But I've definitely mixed coffee and Coke before, like iced coffee and Coke, and it can be delicious in the right circumstance.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're going for.
Different sodas for different folks. I couldn't quite make that rhyme, but you get the idea.
Amen. I say to that. All right. Well, we don't really have any news. Really, the only, I guess, news that we can talk prior to the game was that the rule changes that were supposed to be implemented, if I'm correct, in the beginning of the season prior to the ref lockup or the lockout. So they couldn't do that with the replacement refs, or they decided to not do it with the replacement refs. But now that the full-time refs, the regular refs have been implemented and integrated, they have brought these rules into full effect as of this week. Am I right, Tim?
Yeah, they went into effect. I mean, they didn't really affect the Fire game, I think, in any significant way. When they were first announced, we talked about this before. When they were first announced for MLS Next Pro last season, I thought they would really change the tenor of the game. They didn't. Like, players adapted very quickly. It became a subtle adjustment for the players, where like they figured they learn rapidly. They need to get off the pitch if they are injured, but not so injured they need to get stretchered off, and that's that. It speeds up the game a little bit. It's good to see. VAR announcements are also a thing. We saw those in the World Cup. They didn't come up in the Fire's match, even though there's a couple things that I think maybe could have taken a VAR review, but whatever. I don't think they would have changed the outcome of the match.
Yeah. I think if anything, we saw moments where players did go down and that the only time they stayed down was when they were actually injured and needed to be subbed off or like treated to. So that was the only time. I mean, that was like the main point where I saw like these changes mainly happening. Or actually, I think there was another point, because one of the changes was that when a substitution is announced, you have to leave in a certain amount of time. And I think I remember at one point they announced a sub, they were holding the board off, and the players on the sideline were gesturing for the players being subbed off to hurry up. So I guess that was like another thing, but it was very subtle.
Yeah, it speeds up games a little bit, which is good to see. It cuts down on some of the stoppage time that, had been getting to like 8-10 minutes, at which point it's like almost like, why bother with the normal game clock when you're adding that much to a half? But like, yeah, it helps a little bit. It's subtle. It worked in MLS Next Pro. I think fans are going to like it when they get to see it more.
Yeah. Well, it'll definitely speed up the game, like you mentioned. Kind of like the addition of the pitch clock timer in baseball. That definitely sped up that game. So, I mean, Mr. Matt, do you have anything, I guess, to say about the rule changes? Anything you've noticed?
Well, I was just going to say, I kind of forgot that they did the whole test it out with Next Pro before implementing it in MLS. And I never really realized that was what was going on. But in reality, I actually really like that system. That might actually be a hot take, but I kind of like how they're using Next Pro as a test dummy for the rules, and ultimately sending these rules up to the big dogs, the senior teams, the MLS teams, and implementing them. But in terms of the Fire game specifically, haven't seen those rules operate. Alan, you mentioned at the game that, like you said, maybe the players were getting up a little quicker after going down because they didn't want to have to go off the pitch for that allocated amount of time, but nothing yet. Hopefully they don't cause too much of a ruckus in the future, though. That's all I hope for.
Yeah, and you're right. Like it is kind of cool to see. Like one of the things they said about Next Pro is that they were going to use it to test out what happened in MLS. And so, I have fears they're going to make every game have PKs again, which I don't want to see, but like the substitutions and stuff like that, having to get off the pitch when you're injured, like those are welcome changes that I think just help the game.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, or like how I mentioned with the pitch clock timer in Major League Baseball, they have a very similar thing where they test new rules out in the minor leagues and then bring it up to the major leagues. So kudos to Major League Soccer doing that, doing a very similar thing with Next Pro. So I think it's time that we talk about the game that was probably one of the most darkest times in recent Fire history.
Oh boy. 4-0 loss, which is tied for the worst home loss in Fire history. So that's not a great, I mean, it was a not great result.
It just wasn't a great time, especially for me, who has been not going to Fire games because God keeps sending me on random side quests. And I thought I was going to be on another random side quest because I was stuck on an Orange Line train for half an hour longer than I normally was because something was going on in like the loop the train driver announced. And I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to get to the game at that point. But I got in there and, even though it was cold, the vibes at first, they were great. They were fine. And then everything just went downhill so fast.
Do you want to run us through the goals, or do you want me to do it?
I think you can do it because I think I was too busy crying in the supporter section. Well, not actually crying, but like I needed to sit down at one point. I didn't know. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, honestly.
So I think the first thing that is worth mentioning is that Brian Gutierrez was supposed to get his first start back after 2 games on the bench, but injured himself in pre-game warmups, which pushed Fede Navarro into the starting 11 for the first time this season. That kind of necessitated their lineup to be sort of like reworked a little bit, where I think Fabian Herberts was supposed to start in the double pivot. He started instead on the right wing for reasons that we can discuss later, which pushed Chris Mueller he started on the left wing rather, which pushed Chris Mueller to the right wing, which is not his natural side. And I'm not sure why that decision was made, but it was made. And that happened between the time the lineup came out to the time that the game kicked off. So that was a little bit of a surprise. early on, physical play both ways. Neither team was afraid to get a foul. But the Fire had started to build momentum, in like the 20 something minutes. Chris Mueller had a couple great chances on goal. But he was working off his wrong foot, his left foot, because he was playing inverted, and his left foot just has, his left foot is not good. He got nothing on the shots, making it easy for, I forget the guy's first name, but Beavers, Gavin Beavers. I keep on wanting to call him Justin Beavers because it's like a Justin Bieber thing in my head, and I couldn't get out of that the entire match. But he's 18. He's the backup goaltender normally, so him getting the start was a little bit surprising. Just when the Fire were starting to grow into the match, Real Salt Lake struck. So the first goal in the 24th minute, Alexandros Katrinas, who just came to MLS this year, a Greek left back, one of the only sort of like experienced professionals in the lineup in most of the Real Salt Lake games, played across into Andres Gomez, who was kind of like just at the top of the arc, dead center in the goal. Gomez was left unmarked, which, considering how dangerous he is, just seems like a tactical error by the Fire. In the back of Brady's net, kind of like on the right side. Really not a lot that Brady could do at that point, and it's 1-0 for Real Salt Lake. And at that point, the game was off to the races. A few minutes later, Ziran Shaqiri was injured, some kind of muscle injury. He was fouled, and he was sort of grabbing his ankle after the foul. I'm not sure if that was it or if it was somewhere else, but he came off a few minutes later in favor of Georgios Kousias, which left the team without kind of like a natural 10 playmaker person.
Yeah, at that point we were joking around that we were saying like Shaq's had enough. He's calling it quits. Because I don't think it was obvious. It wasn't obvious for us that he got injured, or I didn't see anything that would signal him getting injured. So it was a bit like, because it's also happened multiple times, like that Shaq just comes off in the first half within like the first half hour. So yeah.
Has that actually happened multiple times? Is that because that was the first time I've seen that, like before 30?
I'm pretty sure there's been at least one or two more games where Shaq has come off in the first half.
And every time he was dealing with muscle injuries or sure, muscle issues. And I think, again, like, I don't know what happened. Like he's fouled. It looked like it was a bad foul. I don't know if it was quite a yellow, but I think a yellow wouldn't have been crazy. And you can see him like sort of like holding his leg a little bit after the foul. And then play resumes a few minutes later, and like Shaq just was not moving very quickly. Like you could see him sort of like walking and then like trying to run, but that was the most he could do. And he comes off a few minutes later. It did look like it was an injury related thing. I don't think that Shaq has faking an injury in his DNA. I just like, I don't see that in him.
Yeah.
But that was a tough blow for the Fire. And again, like that meant that the Fire no longer could play their familiar like 4-2-3-1 formation because they didn't have a number 10 available because Guti was out. I guess Fabian Herbers had technically played that role a little bit, but not really that well. But bringing Koutsias on, the team kind of switched, like it felt like a 4-4-2 formation. I don't know if that's what you guys saw.
To be frank, I didn't see any formation. I don't know if that's just me being a Debbie.
That's an interesting phrase. To be frank, is an interesting choice of words right now.
But I don't know if it's just me being a Debbie Downer or something like that. I found it difficult, I guess, to see any form of formation. Maybe apart from like the back line, or like in somewhere in that double pivot. But I just found it difficult to see any sort of formation. I'm sorry. I think that's just me kind of being, like I said, just a bit down.
In a way, Alan, I get what you're saying. It was kind of all over the place, and I think that boils down to them being unfamiliar in this new hybrid 4-4-2, whatever it really was. It was probably a 4-4-2. It didn't look like one. When you remove a player like Guti and Shaq and his positional capabilities and don't adjust, it looks like what happened against Salt Lake. I felt like every forward pass would like not find the feet of the midfielder that was supposed to be there. And it looked very uncomfortable. So I'd say I agree with you largely, Tim. It was a 4-4-2, just an unsuccessful one.
Yeah. And then a few minutes later, I don't think this is related to the formation. In the 33rd minute, Federico Navarro, who again was on his first start, not expecting to start that match. First start of the season, obviously, because he started before, but was not expecting to start the match. Has a back pass on a fairly innocuous play. And I don't know, like I rewatched the match. I was in the press box for the match initially. Rewatching it, Tyler Terrence made it sound like he thought the back pass was supposed to go to Chris Brady. I thought it was more aimed at Rafa Chihos, who was more tracking Chicho Arango into the box and wasn't really in a position to take a pass. Either way, it wasn't particularly close to either Rafa Chihos or Chris Brady. It was close to Chicho Arango, who is one of the more dangerous goal scorers in the league and was not going to miss when given a golden opportunity like that. So a completely pointless back pass cost the Fire a goal, and they're down 2-0 in the 33rd minute. And then just 4 minutes later, Real Salt Lake wins a corner. Chicho Arango, who by that point, by the way, the goal before was his 7th of the season, which gave him the sole lead of the Golden Boot race in MLS. He just kind of like departs from the pack and heads to the far post off the corner, which if you watch tape of Real Salt Lake, like that is just something he does on corners. That's something that should have been prepared for. And he's left completely unmarked. I mean, the league leading goal scorer, and there's not a Fire player within a nautical mile of him. And you give him that much time and space, and he's not going to miss. He just clear header, heads it in. There's nothing that Brady really could do, and then it's a 3-0 game.
Complete disorientation is what I would call that.
That goal was really funny to me because I remember I didn't see it. And the reason I didn't see it was I was too busy complaining about the goal we had just conceded. But then I remember watching the highlights and the replay of the goal online after the game. And I thought to myself, what are we doing? It was one of those classic what are we doings that I know a lot of us have felt in the past. But that to me was the most unbelievable goal of them all, just because of the circumstance.
Especially because it's something that we've seen from the Fire a number of times over the past, few seasons, different coaches, like different tactical setups. The Fire hired a set piece coach, which I know they typically work more on offensive set pieces than defensive, but like if you're running it in practice, you have to have guys on both sides of the ball, right? Like you have to. I mean, unless you're using traffic cones, but like if you're trying to set up set pieces, like teach people how to do set pieces with traffic cones, I feel like you're just not teaching anyone anything. And yet, like again, like a guy completely unmarked in the box, and it's almost insult to injury that it was Chicho Arango, because I feel like half of the players in MLS could have scored that goal, but the fact that the team left one of the more like most dangerous goal scorers in the league just completely unmarked is even more damning. Because like if it was like a random center back,
Tom Barlow,
right?
Tom Barlow.
Exactly, right. Like Tom Barlow, or like the equivalent of like, I mean, no offense to Wyatt Omsberg, but like Wyatt Omsberg was left unmarked and he scores a goal from there. Well, that's sort of like, well, you don't expect Wyatt Omsberg to be scoring a goal, so
it's cool.
Right, it would be cool. Like, I mean, I would be happy as heck if it happened.
I would be the most happy if Wyatt scored a goal.
Yes, you would.
I'd be going nuts.
Everyone would be going nuts, but you also don't expect it. And so, like, it's almost like it's sort of okay to not really mark Wyatt Omsberg off a corner. It's not, it's completely unacceptable to not mark Chicho Arango off a corner. Like, that's just not a thing you should ever be doing.
No.
And again, it's like runner to the far post. Like that is like soccer 101. Like, what do you do on a corner? You send a runner to the far post and across it. Like that is just like, like you learn that when you're a kid.
well, considering the Fire, whenever they themselves take corners, they always send it to the far post, yet unfortunately no one seems to ever be at said far post.
Fair point. So after that, are we ready to continue with the rundown of that? Yeah. All right.
So let's get over with.
So 3-0. I mean, at that point, like let's be honest, like the match was more or less out of hand. The momentum was kind of equal after that between both teams, but that's only because Real Salt Lake were pretty confident in sitting back, and the Fire were sort of playing out of a makeshift formation. They didn't really have a lot of ideas about how to kind of get down the pitch and create chances. The one chance they really did have that I remember in that first half after that was Koutsias did a lot of like good lay work himself. Like he pulled defenders off of him. He was able to like work across a line and get a ball off his foot deep in first half stoppage time, which resulted in a corner. And on that corner, basically the ball goes into the box, bounces out, lands at Fede Navarro's feet, kind of like at the top of the arc. And instead of playing the ball back in, knowing there are like mere seconds left in stoppage time, he opts for a back pass to Chris Brady, and like that's when the half is called. He was being actively booed at that point. Now, I rewatched the game. He was favoring his knee from around the 40th or 41st minute onwards. Like you can see him like grabbing his knee and touching it and like just like clearly like acting like it's hurting. And that may have been part of it. And he was subbed off at half because of an apparent knee injury for Gaston Jimenez.
Yeah, it felt like a slippery slope, a snowball down the hill. And that felt like the one where it became like an avalanche. And that's ironic considering like they had already conceded 3 goals, and you would think that would be the point of no coming back. But just felt like insult to injury. Another 2 injuries in the game, down 3-0, makeshift formation. You know, it just felt
2 injuries in the match, but like 3 between the time that like warm-up started and the match, right? Which is crazier.
Sure, yeah. Which obviously makes that avalanche even worse.
So second half, I mean, I don't want to dwell too much in the second half because like, I mean, really like, I don't know what you learn when a team is 3-0 up and is perfectly happy to sit compact and would let the other team come to them. And the Fire were in a formation they don't really ever play and whatever. But Gaston Jimenez came on for Fede Navarro, so that gave the team at least like a sort of quasi defensive pivot in a 4-4-2. Diego Luna came on for Andres Gomez in the 56th minute because Gomez had picked up a yellow card earlier. Diego Luna is a French U.S. men's national team player. He is kind of competing with Guti for the same spot in the Olympic roster potentially. Or if not the same spot, like at least a starting spot in the Olympic team roster. And he had been kind of on a bit of a slump because he was playing sort of in an uncomfortable position for him earlier in the season. He came on the 56th minute. And then just 4 minutes later, just the injury bug struck the Fire again. And Gaston Jimenez apparently had some kind of a hamstring issue. I didn't see it in terms of like something that happened with contact, but he was clearly sort of hurt and was indicating he needed to go off. They announced in the press box that he was going to be substituted off. And then a minute or two later, he just like went at a stoppage of play. He just like landed on the pitch and was just like, he signaled that he needed to be stretchered off.
Yeah, you could see at one point that he was just limping, and yeah, he just laid down, and it just that avalanche you mentioned, Matt, it just kept stacking, just kept snowballing.
And I don't know if this is to Frank Klopas' credit or just says something about his aims or mental state, but instead of putting on a defender like Jonathan Dean, I guess would have been one of the options that would have been available. And then, I mean, I don't know what you do, like maybe like push Aragoni into the midfield or something wild. Like, I mean, I don't know. What he opted to do was bring on Tom Barlow for Gaston Jimenez, which pushed Fabian Herbers, who I thought had a okay game in a game where no one really looked great. Back to the defensive pivot playing next to Kellen Acosta, which meant the team had 3 strikers, a winger, and basically like one natural defensive midfielder on the pitch, which is sort of a crazy lineup again. Like, they weren't playing with like 3 strikers really. And it was just some back and forth play. I don't think the Fire ever looked particularly dangerous. I don't think that Real Salt Lake acted like they really felt like they needed another goal until deep in second half stoppage time. When Diego Luna was given the ball in the box. He's not going to miss from that distance. And I guess you could sort of argue that a slump is over with that goal. And like, maybe that's what it takes for him to get back in the starting lineup for Real Salt Lake, which is a weird, I don't know if it's a consolation prize, but like it's, a young player. We were expecting Gucci to be the guy that was sort of like taking advantage of being in the starting lineup. And instead it was a guy that is competing for a spot with him in the national team. So 4-0, the final. That's the worst. I mean, tied for there have been other 4-0 losses, but the worst home loss in Fire history.
Probably the worst one in Soldier Field, considering that the previous 4-0 loss was in Bridgeview against Red Bulls in the playoffs. So, I guess. And a little note that DJ, who was unable to join us, he said, historically speaking, this is the Fire's worst home defeat since the playoff game against Red Bulls in 2017, and the worst regular season home defeat since 2007. The game was shambolic. 18 goals conceded in their first 9 games is the worst since 2014, when they also conceded 18 goals. So, yeah. Chicago's making records here.
I remember I had the great pleasure of not only attending last night's match, but also attending the 2017, not 2020. Wow, that was a while ago at this point.
No one was there in 2020.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Rebels 4-0 loss, where Sasha Klushin and Bradley Wright Phillips were rampant on us. And this is going to sound super
and Tyler Adams, by the way, like that was sort of his coming out game. I felt like
that was, yeah.
I didn't even realize he was on that team, but
no, like that was I remember like what I'm like, damn, that kid can play. But anyways,
no, yeah, obviously really talented kid, a really good Red Bull team. Honestly, definitively better than our team. But if for some reason, and this might sound a little crazy considering that was a playoff game, the last night's loss for some reason just like mentally was worse for me. I'm not 100% sure why. It was just like, it did feel like a new low. And that's crazy coming from me because everyone knows like I'm an optimist, yada, yada, yada. I say good things. But it felt a lot more defeating than the Red Bulls loss, which once again, wild to say considering one was a Red Bull game. I don't know if anyone agrees, but that's just my mental state after the game.
Well, I mean, because the Red Bull game was a playoff game. So you made postseason nonetheless. And yeah, it was a first round exit, but still it was, it was indeed a playoff. I don't know how many games we're in, but it feels like maybe it's like the first third of the season. And yeah, it's
like this match more or less marks the 25% mark in this season. So,
25. So not even
we're a quarter. Yeah. Like we're a quarter way through the season already. And like, that's really, God. Yeah. So it's like the Yogi Berra, who I will maintain is the greatest American philosopher for the rest of my life. Because he said so many stupid things that actually make sense in the end, even though I don't think he realized how smart they were. Said that it gets late really early out here. And like, that's sort of the way it feels for the Fire season, where it's getting late early.
Yeah. And it feels like the last few seasons too, where we're at that situation. I know we're going to talk about this later, but we looked at where we were last year when Ezra was fired versus where we are now. And it's very similar. And it just feels like a repeat of every season since 2018 and obviously everything before 2017 as well. And it's just a very deflating feeling that I know all three of us feel I know Alan feels, even Alan got off the trumpet a little bit towards the end of that
Saxophone
game. That's
every single time you say trumpet.
Saxophone.
Say this every single time,
It's
Matt.
a saxophone.
So
I know it's a saxophone.
in case this isn't obvious, Matt must have failed band class multiple times if you can't tell the difference between a saxophone and a trumpet.
Actually no. It's funny you say that because in 5th grade when they start doing the junior band type thing, I did play saxophone for 2 weeks. It was my instrument of choice, and I remained that I was a saxophonist player. So I'm silly, man. I'm delirious. The fire got me saying stupid things, I guess. I got no excuse. I'm sorry.
You're good. But how we mentioned, we can officially, I think, move into this sort of what I like to say, where do we go from here, or what is going on? And we can sort of start off by saying that, we officially feel like we're in a slump. 1 game has been won in the past 4. With the 1 at home, we have 1 loss at home and then 2 on the road. 1 goal in open play in 4 matches and being shut out in 3 other. 9 points in 9 game, 4 at home, 5 on the road. Winless on the road. Kuipers only has 2 goals in 9 appearances, and he is on track to score only 7-8 goals this season, and that doesn't sound like a $12 million man. And I'm not saying Kuipers is to blame, but something's just going on. And I guess to sort of start us off, I can read the note that DJ has left for us. He says, at the end of the day, this year so far has been a disaster. Even with an extremely promising offseason, it's been a disaster. And at the end of the day, Klopas needs to go. I love Klopas. Dude's a legend and the face of the Fire, but it's time to let him go and let him preserve something, in all caps, of a legacy. Mansueto needs to accept the reality, letting go of Heitz, Peltzer, and Klopas, and forcing himself to search, parentheses, yet again, for someone new.
So, Matt, what do you think about DJ's statement?
I'm sitting here very deep in thought, as I'm sure you're aware, and
pretty sure everyone, all Fire fans alike, are deep in thought.
So I'm gonna say this: there were a lot of comments on social media that seemed to blame Frank Klopas about this, or said that he needs to go. And I think that is maybe the first question is do we think that Frank Klopas needs to go, and do we think that he's the problem? Because I think those are 2 sort of distinct questions.
Yes and yes. I don't like being a harsh critic. I really like backing, the gaffer and backing the boys and all this stuff. I'm an optimist. We've talked about this. But it never made sense in the first place. I questioned the hiring of Klopas. I decided I'd get behind him. In reality, it's clearly not working out. There's no tactical identity. Yeah, he's a motivator, and yeah, he's one of the boys, whatnot. But at the end of the day, he's not picking up results, and it's very clearly, in my opinion, mainly on the manager as opposed to some of the players. Obviously, there's some player issues we can discuss for hours and hours and hours, but I see this primarily as a manager issue. And so to once again reiterate the second answer to your second question, Tim, I do think he's the problem right now. He's definitely not the only problem, but he is the big blind elephant in the room problem. And I think it's time for the Fire to move on. So like DJ said, the part that I agree with most, he can salvage any sort of legacy he wants with this organization, but it needs to be soon, or else that legacy will be torn apart a little bit.
Yeah, Matt, you mentioned, I know on a previous Hot Takes, this was, I'm pretty sure prior to when the season started, that you mentioned that the one thing that was going to keep this team behind was Klopas. And I don't think it would have been to the level that you predicted. Maybe we would have been a bit further up on the table or with points. But I mean, I have to agree as well. Even with the incredible unluckiness with injuries and whatnot that happened to Guti and Fetty and Gaston and Shaq and everything, it's extremely unlucky. But there were just moments where simple passes were either just so easy to read for Real Salt Lake to just easily intercept and run a counterattack with, or just a lack of communication, just balls being thrown out. Just nothing could be built upon, essentially,
so
even with the play.
So here's a question about that though. Like, you've got professional soccer players here, right? Like, we're not talking about like a group of like 6-year-olds here. So the question is, like, if you've got a group of people that are like, professional players, I mean, how much can you really possibly blame the coach for that kind of a performance at that individual technical level, where it's like, there's only so much coaching you can do, right? And coaching happens before the match happens. Like, a very little bit of it happens during the match where you can like tactically adjust some things, but like largely it's what you do in practice and get players to play. But like, simple mistakes on passes like that, I don't think really can necessarily be blamed on the coach, because you can drill that all day. I'm a little bit playing devil's advocate here, but I honestly don't think that this is primarily on Frank. Like, I don't think it's on the players either. I just think that the players that are there do not equate a winning roster in MLS. And we've seen, I think, mistakes with the roster composition so many times. So I really think that this is more on Georg Heitz than anyone else. And like, one of the things, the team has felt exactly the same in terms of like the way it plays and the results. Like, what if you're a fan going to a match and you want to know, like, what is it I'm expecting to see that day, right? The team has felt the same with whether it's been Frank Klopas, whether it's been Ezra Hendrickson, or whether it's been Wiki. Like the past 3 coaches, Rafa, Wiki, like the team would drop, like, would concede late goals and would have a win, and then it became a draw because they were conceding late. They were unable to score in key moments. Same thing was happening with Ezra. Same thing has been happening with Frank Klopas. And the points per game on these coaches, I'm just going to read them out really quickly. In 33 matches now, Frank Klopas has averaged 1.151 points per game. Ezra Hendrickson averaged 1.136 points per game. So if the Fire
in the same amount of games, or like throughout his whole
throughout their 10 years. So that's 44 games for Ezra, 33 for Klopas, and 33 and counting for Klopas. Wiki in 51 matches averaged 0.98 points per game. So a little bit worse, but I mean, to give you an idea of like how these numbers can change, if the Fire don't manage a win against Atlanta, Klopas will dip below Ezra. That'll be the second time it's happened this season, because they did temporarily before they got the win against Houston. And Vjelko Paunovic from 2016 to 2019, who had a much less expensive roster, actually has a slightly better points per game average at 1.176. But like, where all of these numbers, like Wiki was a little bit lower at 0.98. All the other ones are 1.1, and then we're talking like third point digits. Like, if one of them had one more win, it would have changed the numbers to like, they're all spitting distance with each other. Obviously, Pano wasn't a coach that played when Georg Heitz was the general manager, but he had a much less expensive roster. Like, on the whole, like I know that Bastian Schweinsteiger was a expensive player, not nearly as expensive as Shaq, but when you have 3 coaches under Georg Heitz and the results are almost identical. So 2 questions. Like, one, like, do you think the coach is really the problem at that point? And 2, if you do think the coach is the problem, do you trust Georg Heitz to be the guy hiring the next coach? Because that's who it would be. Because we've had 3 coaches with the same results.
Yeah. You asked a very, very loaded question there.
Content, baby.
Yeah, content, baby. No, you're absolutely right. And you got the gears turning in my head. One thing I want to put out there, in my personal opinion, and we probably talked about this last year when Ezra got fired and all that stuff. That's the only tenure that I'm not like actually disappointed about of the Heitz era. Wiki era was a disappointment. This new Klopas era has obviously been a disappointment, but I'm willing to give Ezra a little slack because he was an assistant coach coming in. And as he posts on Twitter, I love his tactical identity, all that stuff. So I've only seen 2 failures, so to speak. in Heitz's tenure, which is still terrible. But I feel like overall the answer is we're just cursed to fail eternally and we'll never ever live happiness. But
I like that answer.
I do. Yeah, I know.
Sort of
I know
what it
Alan's
feels like.
feeling.
That's sort of just
Alan's
what it feels
feeling-
like with any team in this city. I mean, you look at the team that plays on 35th and Shields, and they're in a very similar situation. Or at least that's what it feels
Alan
like.
needed to get that White Sox talk, and I was going to try to avoid it because that's been worse than being a Fire fan, man. I'll be honest.
It just feels the same, and it feels like mediocrity just runs in this city. I don't know.
So
why.
here's the difference, though. One, you can get tickets for $2 to White Sox games sometimes, and the beer and food are better. So
You can also get a
True.
campfire.
if you're going to
meal
see a
right there.
team lose, I'm just saying.
Like if I want to
It's
see a
better
team
for
lose, I'm gonna be drinking a milkshake. With that's like a s'mores milkshake, and not spending like over $18 on food and beverage that is mediocre at best.
I like that I said drinks and food, and you chose like an item that is exactly on the fence between being a drink and a food.
Milkshake's a drink. Come on now.
No, but like the s'mores milkshake, like that thing, like
Oh, true. Yeah.
All right.
Tim always coming up. Tim, real quick, I want to respond to your second question, which was, do we trust York Heitz to pick a new manager? And I'm actually going to say something that I hope I get criticized for, which is how I work on hot takes and not on this pod as much. I do trust him, and here's why. I truly believe, and this is just my opinion, there is no factual backing to this at all, that Klopas was hired because they didn't have someone better prepared to say yes at the time. So they could fire Klopas whenever that person is said ready to become the next manager of the Fire. And I think there's a few people this could apply to. That being said, I think that when Klopas inevitably gets fired, in my opinion, if he doesn't win 2 out of the 3 next home games before St. Louis, he's probably on the outs. Once again, my opinion. I think that they're going to go in and splash the big cash and finally get the guy that we're all going to scream and be happy about. So I do trust him because I think it's already scheduled in the plan. That's 500 IQ right there.
So here's my counter argument to that. And I'm gonna try to do like the hot takes thing, even though like I'm not warmed up for it. But Heitz so far has chosen coaches that I think are not really in a position to challenge him. Like it was Ezra Hendrickson who, like, he was given a first time coaching, like head coaching gig, and like you have to say yes to that when you're offered it because you don't know if it's going to come again. But that's also, Ezra was not going to fight with Heitz about like roster composition and stuff like that. And in terms of like splashing the big cash, like one of the biggest issues the Fire have had over the past few seasons is they have spent way too much money for players on their level of performance, like throughout the roster. Like Rafa Chihos, when he came into the league, was I would say like a top 10% center back in the league. I think he's faded since then, which is what happens when some players get, on the other side of 30. And he no longer, I think, is as effective as he was when he came in. He's still on the same salary, which isn't his fault. Like I never blame players for making as much money as they can, but like he's not really earning his keep in terms of like what he's getting paid and what he's producing. And we've seen that time and time again from Georg Heitz, where when you get a player that's decent, they overpay for them. Like Arnaud Souquet is the team's second choice or sometimes third choice at right back now, earning $600K a year, like 600 and something, like almost 650, 700.
A lot of money.
And
Better than I'll ever make.
that should be getting you 2 fullbacks in this league, like 2 starting caliber MLS fullbacks. And Arnaud Souquet does not start on any team that is planning on having to have planning to have a home playoff game. Like he just doesn't. He like hasn't shown that level since coming to the league. And I mean, he's a nice guy. Like he's a really nice guy. He is committed to the team. Like, that's not the issue. He wants to win. Like, that isn't the issue. But the performance we've seen from him on the pitch, just, he's not worth that money. And that's the money that it took to bring him in. When Xherdan Shaqiri came in, and I know he's a DP, so like the money is kind of academic because it's not our money. And in a salary cap league, he hits the cap of the same amount, whether he's paid what he's earning or 10 times that. But he wasn't playing in Ligue 1, and they more or less had to double his salary to bring him here. Like, it's not efficient spending of money. And with Shaq, that's one thing because he's a DP, but with everyone else, it starts hitting the roster, because if you're spending money in excess on a player that's not producing at that level, you can't spend the money elsewhere. Like, we're spending, like Miles Robinson level money on players that are just like average MLSers, and Miles Robinson is one of the top backs in the league, and we just don't have that. So that's why I keep on coming back to Georg Heitz, and like in terms of like him splashing the money, like every time he's had an opportunity to buy a coach, it's like he's like panning for gold. Like initially, like Wiki was like I think he was trying to find a diamond in the rough or something like that, or maybe it was the Swiss connection. I don't know. Ezra Henderson, I think really could have done more with the squad if the squad had been better composed, but he wasn't really given an MLS playoff level squad. So that's what I keep on coming back to. And that's why I don't really trust Georg Heitz to be making a fourth coaching hire, considering the results have been virtually identical over the past 3 coaches that he's hired.
No, it's completely fair. And I'll say, because my only counter argument to your counter argument is because this is his 4th go around and he's on kind of that year contract. Well, is he on a year contract? What does his contract look like again?
It's never been publicly announced. So we have sources that say that it's a 3-year contract. I mean, I can more or less confirm that it's a 3-year contract. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he knows he knows that it's time to compete. That first off shows with the type of players coming in, 12 million on a DP striker. And I am confident, you know what they commonly say, Tim, 4th time's the charm. No, I truly think that they're going to bring in a coach that, yeah, that's what they say, I promise. They're going to bring in a coach, United States coaching caliber
Are those the same people that say 4 strikes and you're out?
Yes,
I haven't met these people.
No, anything to fit my agenda, I promise, Tim. No, I think they're going to bring in a guy who will then kind of get in the face of Heitz. And obviously there's no value in Heitz bringing a guy who's just going to get in his face. But ultimately, I do think Heitz wants to win. And if that's what it takes, I think we're going to see it. If Heitz, goes and hires another assistant coach and we end up finishing in 9th place, 10 matches into the 2025 season, gone next, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, we'll have to wait and see, because right now it sucks.
I know Heitz wants to win. I don't think he wants to lose. I think the question is, does he know how to? Right? Like, I mean,
fair.
Because so far we haven't seen it. And again, like when he inherited the Fire squad, they hadn't made the playoffs in 2 seasons, which happens to teams in this league. But like 2 seasons stretching to 6 is unique, right? Like the Fire have the 2nd longest playoff drought in league history after Toronto FC, whose playoff drought started when they entered the league. And the way they turned that around was, it wasn't hiring a coach because they like moved coaches around and it didn't really make a difference. They hired a GM. Like they hired Tim Bezbachenko, and he turned that squad around in relatively short order. And I mean, because like you guys remember, like, or at least I think Matt, you were watching like MLS like 15 years ago. Like Toronto were a joke. Like they were literally like Chivas USA was like a joke that was so funny it was almost like slapstick level. And then like in terms of joke, like immediately after that, in terms of level of jokes, was like Toronto, where it's like, what the heck are you doing? Like, why are you in this league? You're not even in the right country, and you guys can't win a damn football game. And they went from not like being a total joke, like an afterthought, like wooden spoon winning, to competitors within like 2 years, because they hired a GM that reworked the roster, that brought in coaches that had ideas and would work with this system. And it wasn't just like this is a good player, like not thinking that players are Lego pieces, but like this is a good player for this system and the way we want to play. And I'm going to hire a coach that wants to play that way. And we just haven't seen that coherently under Georg
Tim,
Heitz.
was that the Giovinco era? That was the Giovinco era.
Yeah,
right?
It was.
Oh man, that might have been the nastiest team in MLS history.
It was, and it was Tim Bezpachenko, who's now in charge of Columbus, and like now, like in terms of like competition for nastiest team in MLS history, like, like because it's not just like
blank check Joe.
And that's the thing. And so I can say Joe Mansueto was in the locker room after the loss last night, talking to players and stuff. We didn't see much of that because we got in after that, I think, which was intentional. But I wish we could ask him, like, what do you think about what's going on? Because
press conference time.
Because he's talked about, they had an interview with him that was by the team, like by a team employee, but posted on Twitter and like socials before the season, basically talking about the way that he thought that things had been moving, behind the scenes and like going in the right direction. And I think that Georg Heitz does have, like, I'm not trying to like vilify the guy. I think that he's done some things pretty well. And I think that I've heard that he should get a lot of credit for rebuilding some things behind the scenes in the academy, helping create the MLS Next Pro team that is frankly one of the better teams in the league. Like it's a league where like a lot of teams don't really have a coherent identity or strategy, and the Fire 2 like are good. Like they are legitimately a good team that are fun to watch. But
yeah, like I've been to more Fire 2 games than just Fire games, period. And even with the loss to Indy in the last Open Cup game, it was so much fun to watch Ludovic's Fire 2 play. They just, even when they were outranked against Indy, it was just one slim mistake that cost them that, and they definitely could have pulled through. It was just a fun brand of soccer and watched in comparison to what we got here.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like that was a team that was built under Heitz's watch from scratch, so like he gets credit for that. But in terms of the first team composition, it's just, I don't think it's there.
I can't wait for Ludo to be our interim manager in 4 or 5 weeks. That's going to be great. So fun. It won't be him.
That was actually going to be my next question, because I know we're going long in this segment, but I think this is what people care about, and we can just run through the Atlanta preview quickly, because I mean, at this point, like, it's a crapshoot. But when Paulo Nagamura was hired as an assistant coach, I don't know what you guys thought. He was the head coach of Houston Dynamo before he was fired in favor of Ben Olsen. And I thought it was an interesting choice that the team was hiring an assistant coach with MLS head coaching experience. Because they'd had that before with Frank Klopas as the assistant and head coach in front of him. And again, they have that. And I kind of feel like that's probably the guy in waiting. Now, Paulo Nagamura's Houston Dynamo teams were not good. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. Like, they were not good. They were not fun to watch. Ben Olsen inherited mostly the same squad a year later, and they went from looking like a joke to being a home playoff team and winning the US Open Cup. So again, like, Paulo Nagamura, I don't think is a great MLS head coach, but he is an MLS head coach that is currently sitting in the Fire dugout next to Frank Klopas during matches.
Paulo was one of the final candidates for Ezra Hendrickson's coaching position back in 2021, 2022. I lost count of time. So he's always been a guy that the Fire organization has clearly valued, or at least like enjoyed the concept of. And although his Houston team, like Tim mentioned, wasn't good in practice, having a guy who has MLS coaching experience on the bench fuels my conspiracy about Frank being a placeholder. They can fire whenever, once they have a bigger coach who's ready to say yes, because the interim manager then is a guy that, has some experience in the league and can lead you through the rest of the half of the season very averagely, or whatever the term is, but he's a good guy. He's a good coach. I'm excited for it. I'm not excited for him because that means Frank is going to get cut. But if he is in the role where he's head coach, I'm excited to see what he can produce because ultimately there's worse coaches to have as an intern.
So, I mean, honestly, my read is that we may be seeing a lot of that now. The same thing happened in Real Salt Lake, basically, where the head coach stuck around, but the assistant coaches under him were fired. Not the head coach's choice, but they had the coaches under him replaced. And I think it becomes a situation where like the manager is literally being like a manager, where it's like you're not really hands-on, you're not running training and stuff like that. And there's people below you that do that. And I sort of think that maybe what part of the plan was with the fire. But I mean, you know, one thing before we close this out though, there's fair criticisms I think about Frank Klopas. I don't think a fair one is that he doesn't care. Like I think he would do anything for the team. And I think that when he walks into the room during press conferences after games, he brings a lot of energy with him. And you can feel what that energy is. I think that every reporter in the room can. When the team is happy, he is buoyant. Like, and when the team didn't have a good result, when it's a loss, it's clear that he takes it with him. Like he's taking it on the chest every single time it has been a bad result. So there's a lot of criticism that I think that are fair of him, but I don't think that one is that he doesn't care or that he would not in any circumstance do what is best for the club.
Absolutely. I every single Fire fan, I could say this very confidently, likes Frank Klopas as a steward of the club, as a representative of what the Chicago Fire Football Club is. And nobody doubts the fact that, you know, he has the passion. He wants to win quite possibly as much as us, if not more than us. It's just
I guarantee it's more than us.
Yeah, exactly. Like the dude's a fighter. I mean, he's won trophies with this club as a player. There's no reason he wouldn't want to do it. I just think, you know, the big puzzle piece that's missing that would turn Frank Klopas from a club legend to a club like superhero is that tactical identity. That's unfortunately very bland and not resulting in a lot of points, which sucks. And it sucks to feel that way about a club legend. But man, that dude cares, huh? He really does.
Yeah. All I'm going to say is that like just something needs to flip to make this fan base a bit more optimistic. One thing I commented at the end of the game last night, as of time of recording, was when even Sector Latino stops playing and singing, that's when you know something's wrong. They never stop playing or singing when we concede or anything. And after that fourth goal went in, it was complete silence in the supporter section on both ends. That's how you know, like, everyone's looking for some sort of light at the end of the dark tunnel.
So that actually puts a lot of pressure onto the next match, which...
Yes. Next match, because this is currently a homestead. We just finished out the game, whatever it was, against RSL. And in a few days' time, we will be seeing an opponent that we faced previously, and also a game that was considered to be one that was kind of to forget, and that is Atlanta. So they're in 7th place as of right now. They're coming to us this time. Second meeting in just what seems was a few weeks ago, because it was on March 31st when they won 3-0. Their current record is 3-3-2 with 11 points. They have lost their last game 2-1 to Cincinnati at home. And in 5 games, they have 1 win. And surprise, surprise, the 1 win is against us.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise,
which means
surprise.
that the Fire have a win more recently than the Atlanta United do. So just throwing that out there in terms of optimism.
This time it's Tim who's the optimist.
Look, and the other thing is, like, Thiago Amado has been kind of on a bit of a slump, which obviously seems to be the Fire's issue more than anything else, because Diego Luna was on a slump and then he scored against the Fire, thereby ending the slump. And so we hate to be the team in that position, but they really have not looked great. And honestly, I under their head coach Gonzalo Pineda, I don't think that they have ever looked better than the sum of their parts. Like, this is almost like the France squad, where you just have so much talent in the squad, and then under Didier Deschamps, like, it's like they get results, but like it's almost like in spite of the coach rather than because of the coach. But I think they're a beatable team. I'm just not confident right now that the Fire are the team to beat them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what we're all feeling now.
Listen, this Atlanta United team, in my opinion, should be better. And similarly to the Fire, I believe they're held back by their coach. I think Tim might have mentioned something similar. I mean, look at it on paper. They have arguably the best fullback in MLS this season, Brooks Lennon. They got, in my opinion, the best striker in the league in Giakoumakis. Dude's a monster. And of course, they have Almada. And one thing Tim said that really struck with me is the Fire have a history of allowing guys like Diego Luna, or allowing teams that are in slumps to like reignite and move on with like ferociousness. You know what I mean? And I really fear like we're in a very, very vulnerable position to have that sort of performance against them. That being said, because I am an optimist, and I don't know if I'm jumping the gun when I say this, but I always do a score prediction in the previews for the games, and I always
hold it. We'll do that. Holding it. Hold.
I got excited.
It's all right. Excited to be back. That's perfectly fine, Matt.
I know. I'm gonna cook later.
Let him cook. Next thing you know, Soldier Field's on fire.
Well, that actually happened in the Dutch League earlier today when we were recording. So,
Really?
In their cup final, yeah.
Where are you in Holland?
Wait, what happened? Someone set something on fire in Holland? That's awesome.
Like Feyenoord supporters literally set the stadium on fire. Yeah.
Forgot to tell you guys I'm filming this in Amsterdam. My bad.
Matt is the only guy showing up in Amsterdam the day after 420.
Oh, dear.
Dude, we live in Chicago. 420 is a national holiday here, too. It's totally cool.
Hey, man.
Amsterdam's great, though. Lovely people, great food. And loved burning that stadium down, too, by the way.
All right. Atlanta. It's a place in Georgia.
It is, but they're playing here. They're playing at Soldier Field on grass, not the turf they normally play on.
That is, yes, that is true. Okay. Well, I mean,
another grass reference. Hey-o, 420.
We keep forgetting the slide whistles. Yeah.
We're slowly morphing into a comedy podcast just because that's probably the only angle we can take that doesn't become emotionally devastating.
Laughter is the best medicine, I guess.
I'm feeling a lot better after laughing. That's all I'm going to say.
That's fair, yeah. Although, actually, if you have medicine may be the best medicine. That's not medical advice. Just talk to a professional about it.
Yeah, talk to your doctor.
Tim's a doctor. Yep, Tim's a doctor. I do think that this game is like the do or die game for the Fire. How do you bounce back from the worst regular season loss since 2007? Are you against a formidable foe? We can agree on that. They got some talent. Almada is probably going to go crazy like Arango did. Captain him in fantasy. That's my best piece of advice to you. But, Frank Klopas does instill this positive mentality of continuing. And I wouldn't be surprised if we sneak out with 3 points. You have to sneak out with 3 points. We say this every single home game, I feel like, but it's a must win. And this one feels like a must win. That's 5 musts, by the way. That's a lot of wins.
I feel like that's more wins than we can muster as of right now, honestly.
So at the beginning of this 3-game homestand, interrupted by a match to St. Louis, which, I wish we could travel well enough to make it a Fire home game, but that's not going to happen. There's going to be people there that are going to be there. They will be loud. They will be very loud. But considering the 3-game homestand, 5 points out of the 3 games would have put the Fire back on track to be like a like sneaking into the playoff team. The one loss, but like realistically, with them being home matches, you want more than the 5. The maximum they can get now is 6, right? They need to get those 6. And if they do that, I think they can reasonably have their head held high. It's not going to be easy because we don't know what those injuries, what their impact is going to be for the Fire. And like a Fire lineup that does not have Shaqiri, does not have Gucci, does not have Gaston Jimenez, like does not have Fede Navarro in it potentially. So like it's going to be rough. And after the game on Saturday, Frank Klopas said that he didn't want to put Gutman in because he was concerned, even though he was cleared to play, that he was still injured. So, I mean, like the Fire cannot afford another injury now, but they also can't afford another loss. So you've got to go for the win, I think. And it has to be 2 wins out of the next two games. Like it has to be.
You got to go full throttle. If that means starting 3 strikers, start 3 strikers.
Go
Just
full
kidding.
hog
This
plus
is why
the postage, as one would say.
Exactly. And this is why I'm not a coach. But it's must win. You got to go out. You got to get everything. All I'm saying it would be a great time to have Alex Monis on the roster. That's my 2 cents. I feel like
that's a
really
good. That is actually like a good question. I mean, not that Alex Motis is available anymore because he's not on the Fire system, but given the absences to Fire players, like the injuries, and the question becomes like, do they start considering bringing in Fire 2 players? And like Frank Klopas has said that they bring in Harold Azario every time. Like he was asked about this in a press conference midweek. Given how well Harold Azario has been playing in MLS Next Pro and the Open Cup matches, like would they consider bringing him in? And the answer specifically, like they have him in for training every time they've got the chance. Does that mean that he gets a call up on the roster? I don't know. Like Amari Glasgow is another offensively talented player. I mean, Harold Azario, though, I think probably has the higher ceiling of the two. He's been playing well. I mean, there's a number of players, but they're young. They're not proven talents. Like they have good games. They've got bad games because of how young they are. I don't know.
Hey, listen, the guy to remember, and I said Osorio actually is my answer to this. Who's the next guy to be called up to the first team? But in reality, I think the answer is actually Poreba. This is a guy who as a midfielder has scored a lot of goals already this season and who has spot starts in Poland. So shouldn't be slept on. But Tim, to your point that you said earlier about how it might have been Alan actually, who our second team has all this talent and is one of the better teams in the league, use that to bolster your depth. I mean, you got guys like Kofi on the wing who is absolutely ridiculous, carving up, that's what I'm trying to say, the Indy 11 right back, and then Glasgow and Osorio and Poreba, and then some good kids in the academy pipeline too. Give them a go. Maybe they'll play with a little heart. They're trying to find their place. The first team players, already have their place. These guys are trying to learn and grow and make it. I'm not opposed to it at all.
Play with heart definitely makes sense considering how much, like in those 3 games, those 3 Open Cup games, how much heart they played with. 100%.
Yep.
And Pareba's a good shout. Like I don't know, if you realize he was Polish, probably by the last name Allen, but
yes,
like he,
and I do remember he came from, I think he was on loan with Stal Mielec or something.
Yeah, so he was actually born in Chicago. Then I think that he moved to Poland as a kid. So he's local, but also like Polish. So
like me.
Yeah.
Like me.
Although I'm going to then ask you like what youth orchestra in Poland you were in the academy program for.
Paderewski Symphony Orchestra, I guess.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, but that's one of the top academy orchestra programs in Poland. I don't know if listeners know this.
No, if anything, it's an orchestra, like a Polish-based orchestra in Chicago, and they do have a violin academy. So, Anyways, yeah.
And yet he plays saxophone to Fire games. So he's holding out on the good stuff.
It's a trumpet.
Okay. I feel like we're going off several sidetracks so much so that this train's about to collapse. I feel like now we can get to Matt's favorite part of predictions.
So interestingly, I've actually changed my mind since we last talked about this about 10 minutes ago. I'm going with the same result, which is a draw, which is very, very rare for me because I'm like legally bound to only predict wins, but I'm actually going with a draw. I believe our last 2 times we've hosted Atlanta, or at least frequently, we've drawn with them. And I feel like we are going to have enough mentality to block the rebound of Atlanta United, but also not have the mentality strong enough to the point where we garner 3 points. I think we're going to save that for the STL, where I will be screaming my head off. But I'm going 1-1 final. Hugo and Giakoumakis are the goal scorers. Chris Brady, though, does save 3 points with over 5+ saves. One, which will be the week goal of the month. Not goal of the week, goal of the month. That's my very in-depth prediction.
Incroyable.
Thank you.
Honestly, this sounds crazy because I'm not sure how the Fire score 2 goals in a match, but I feel like there is going to be a 2-2 draw. But I think that draw is the right call. It just seems like, honestly, the Fire have just been not there, good, but not quite satisfying enough. Like there's like a food metaphor I could probably make of like something like popcorn, where it's like somebody like makes it like air pop popcorn that is just popcorn and doesn't have like any butter or like salt or anything on it. And you're like, it's a snack, I guess, but it doesn't really give you any satisfaction. And I feel like that's kind of where the Fire are going to be. And a draw against Atlanta, there's like enough there where you're like, this is like a top tier team, or should be a top tier team, even if they're not there in the standings. And so we can't really hate that draw, where it's like just enough to avoid catastrophe, but not enough to be satisfying.
It makes sense. Unbuttered
popcorn. I love that analogy. I love that.
I also was leaning towards a draw, more in the direction also of a 1-1. I feel like, though, it's going to be a dead ball goal, and maybe like a penalty for the Fire, and then Giakoumakis gets something, or so maybe a step, but not a complete step. It just needs to be something for people to come back to the stadium. Apparently, Bradley Wright Phillips said on Apple TV's MLS wrap-up, he said, if I was a fan, I'd be handing in my season tickets after the Fire game. That's what he apparently said. And he said, paying to watch them is a waste of money at this moment, I've got to be honest. So apparently he said that on the most recent MLS wrap-up. So,
and he's paid by this I think we've talked about before, but like MLS and Apple TV, like they're not Apple TV employees, they're MLS employees when they're saying this.
That's crazy.
So yeah, no.
BWP, wow, killed us in 2017 and is killing us now. Coincidence? I think not.
So we'll see. I mean, again, the team does need 2 wins out of these next 2 games. Like it's that simple. Like this in New England, like, you know.
Amen. All right. Anything else really to say to our ladies and gentlemen and they them of the Fire before we leave them to ponder the thoughts that we've left? We've definitely left a lot of things to think about, honestly.
Just one thing, which I think is important. It's everyone loves a team that's winning. It's like almost like a Tolstoy-esque thing where it's like happy families are all the same, blah. But honestly, I really appreciate people that are listening to this when they know the result is not what they wanted. And so it's hard to stick with a team that isn't winning, but it's also hard to stick with like hearing about a team that's not winning. And so I really do, like, especially in times like this, appreciate the people that are still like listening to this and hearing us. And I mean, we love your feedback always, but especially when like times are hard. And this is one of those.
Yeah, and specifically to that, there was someone who came up to me in the supporter section. They were like, "Do you by chance make a podcast?" I was like, maybe I am a host of a certain podcast. And they were like, "Can you shout out our friend Jonathan Kane because we want him to be a soccer fan and like go to games?" I'm like, "You know what? Absolutely." And he's like, I love listening to the podcast. I always listen all the way through. So thank you. So there's that shout out. I just now remembered to do it.
You saved it until the 76th minute, man.
I mean, hey, if it's true, if it's, they'll know if they listen all the way through. And
so this is a test. This was a test for that. You were testing them. You're like, you said you listened all the way through. It's a test.
It's a test. It's a lapse of my memory. I had to write it down even, and I still somehow forgot. But still, no.
Dude, I can use lapse of memory things. I'm old enough where like that starts to be a thing, but like, you don't got that excuse, man. You just don't.
I have a minor case of severe ADHD. It happens. I'm sorry.
Did you say our shout-out's name is Jonathan Kane?
That's what they told me, which is incredible. That just sounds like a combination of Jonathan Taze and Patrick Kane.
Exactly. Shout out Jonathan Kane. You rule. Be a soccer game. It's hard to be a fan or get into soccer when your team isn't that good or your local team's not that good.
But it's still fun going out to games.
Yes. But I think the real reason, like Tim said, people still choose to listen to this podcast and go to games and be a part of this fan base is because we feel connected and we feel like we're part of a community. And it sounds super cliche, but ultimately that's what makes being a Fire fan really, really special, even when you're just lost 4-0 to Salt Lake, a good team in the Western Conference. So
United
thanks, Jonathan.
We stand, divided we fall.
Yeah.
Amen. Mazel tov.
Yeah. And we appreciate all of you is the point.
Yep.
Yes.
We totes appreciate everyone here and for your support and listening. So I feel like that's it. We really dragged this one out. Congrats if you made it all the way. So, ladies and gentlemen of the Fire, as well as they, them, I almost forgot, but I will never forget. I, as always, am Alan, the pole with the goal, joined by Tim and Matt. He's finally back. Through thick and thin, united we stand, divided we fall. Come on, United Red.